Some shifts don't end when you clock out. They follow you home in the rearview mirror, replay in empty hallways long after you've locked the doors, or trap you in loops you can't explain to anyone who works daylight hours. Seattle's graveyard workers know this better than most. Because in a city built on top of its own ruins, layered with immigrant ghosts and unnamed graves, the night shift means sharing your workplace with something that never left. These 11 people tried to do their jobs. What they encountered instead will make you question whether some places ever truly close, or if the dead just keep working alongside us, unnoticed, until someone finally pays attention. Welcome to Verified Fears. If you've ever felt watched during a late shift, if you've heard footsteps in empty buildings or seen movement where no one should be, don't look away from this screen, because by the end of these stories, you'll understand exactly what's been standing behind you all along. And if Seattle's night has taught us anything, it's that some coworkers never clock out. Hit that subscribe button now, because once you hear what graveyard staff have witnessed in this city, you'll never see your own workplace the same way again. The ferry terminals, hospital wings, underground passages, and warehouses of Seattle are about to reveal what happens when the living and the dead share the same shift. I used to think working the late manifest desk at the Seattle ferry terminal was the easiest job in the world. Quiet, predictable. Just me, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the rhythmic departure of boats cutting through Puget Sound toward Bainbridge Island. The last ferry left at 12:50 a.m., and my job was simple. Reconcile the passenger count, file the manifest, lock up the booth. I'd done it hundreds of times. But that was before the night I watched 101 people board a ferry, and only 28 get off. It started like any other Thursday in October. Cold wind rolling off the water, that smell of diesel and salt air, tourists long gone and just the regulars making the crossing, service workers heading home, a few insomniacs, the occasional drunk who missed the earlier boat. I watched them file through the turnstiles, counted them on my screen. The automated system is precise. Every ticket scan, every vehicle, every walk-on passenger gets logged. When the departure bell rang, my screen showed 101 passengers. I noted it in the manifest. Watched the MV Kaliton pull away from the dock, its lights cutting through the fog as it disappeared into the darkness. 35 minutes. That's how long the crossing takes. I used that time like I always did. Coffee, paperwork, scrolling through my phone. At 1:28 a.m., I got the arrival confirmation from Bainbridge. Standard procedure. But when I pulled up the disembarkation count, my stomach dropped. 28 passengers, 28. I stared at the screen, refreshed it. Checked the vehicle count. Those matched. Checked for system errors. Nothing. 101 people got on that ferry. 28 got off. 73 people had vanished somewhere in the 35 minutes it took to cross 3 miles of water. I called Bainbridge Operations. The guy who answered sounded half asleep. I explained the discrepancy. He went quiet for a long moment, then told me to hold. I heard him talking to someone in the background, muffled voices. Then he came back on. We're showing 28 walk-ons departed the vessel. You sure about your boarding count? I pulled up the footage from the boarding cameras, counted manually. 43 in the first 10 minutes, 21 in the next 5. 37 stragglers before the final bell. 101. I told him I was sure. Another long pause. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. Check your footage again. Look at their faces. I didn't understand what he meant, but I pulled up the video and started scanning through. At first, everything looked normal. People in jackets and hoodies, a few with backpacks, the usual exhausted faces of late-night commuters. But then I started noticing things. Small things. A woman in a dress that looked wrong. Too formal, too old-fashioned, like something from a black and white movie. A man in a heavy wool coat with a style I couldn't place, his hat pulled low. Another woman with victory rolls in her hair, the kind you see in photos from the 1940s. I kept scrolling, more of them. Clothes that didn't fit the decade. Faces that looked slightly off, like they were photographs someone had animated. And the strangest thing, none of them were looking at their phones. Not one. In 2025, at a ferry terminal at midnight. Not a single person staring at a screen. I called Bainbridge back. The line rang 6 times before someone picked up. Different voice this time. Older. He didn't wait for me to speak. "You're calling about the count." "Yeah," I said. "There's something wrong with the passengers. The footage shows." "I know what it shows," he interrupted. "How long have you worked the night manifest?" 8 months. "Then you haven't been there long enough." He sighed, and I heard him sit down, the creak of a chair. "Listen carefully. What you're seeing happens 4, maybe 5 times a year. Always on the last ferry, always when the fog is thick enough. We don't talk about it. We don't report it. We reconcile the manifest with the disembarkation count, and we move on." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that ferry route has been running since 1951. And in 1952, the MV Kalakala, different boat, same route, had an incident. Engine failure halfway across. 73 people went into the water. They recovered 18. The rest were never found. And ever since then, on certain nights, they still try to make the crossing." I looked at my screen. At the frozen image of a woman in a 1950s dress. Her face turned toward the camera, but somehow not quite seeing it. Her expression patient and waiting. "They board," he continued, "because they don't know they're dead. They think they're going home. And somewhere between Seattle and Bainbridge, they realize they can't. So they don't get off. They just fade. Return to wherever they came from. We stopped trying to explain it 20 years ago." "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I said it, I was scrolling back through the footage, watching those faces again. Watching the way they moved. Not wrong exactly, but slightly delayed, like a video with desynced audio. Watching how none of them interacted with the other passengers. How the living seemed to unconsciously step around them, giving them space without realizing why. "You want proof?" he asked. "Go down to the dock. The Kalitan's due back in 15 minutes. When it pulls in, take your binoculars and look at the passenger deck. Look at the windows, then tell me what you see." He hung up. I sat there for 3 minutes, maybe 4, telling myself I wouldn't do it. Telling myself this was some kind of hazing ritual for new manifest clerks. A ghost story they told to break up the monotony. But my hands were already reaching for the binoculars we kept for checking vehicle plates. I was already walking out of the booth, down the ramp, toward the dock where the ferry would arrive. The fog was thicker now. I could hear the horn before I saw the lights, low and mournful, cutting through the darkness. Then the Kalitan emerged. A massive shape resolving out of gray nothing, its windows glowing yellow against the black water. It began its turn, engines reversing, wake churning white foam. I raised the binoculars, focused on the passenger deck. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Empty seats, a few passengers standing, getting ready to disembark. Normal. Then I saw them, standing along the far windows, not moving, not preparing to leave, just standing there, facing the Seattle skyline. 15, maybe 20 figures. I adjusted the focus, tried to see their faces, and that's when I realized I could see through them. Not completely. They weren't transparent like movie ghosts. But I could make out the seats behind them, the reflections in the glass overlapping with their forms. A woman in a hat with a veil, a man in a military uniform, teenagers in clothes I'd seen in my grandmother's photo albums. All of them just standing there, looking toward a city that had changed beyond recognition since the night they died. The ferry docked, the ramp lowered. 28 passengers walked off, tired and alive, and completely unaware of the others who remained behind. I watched through the binoculars as the figures at the windows began to fade, dissolving like fog in sunlight, until the passenger deck was empty again. I went back to my booth, filed the manifest with the corrected count of 28. When my shift ended at 3 a.m., I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home. I still work the night manifest. I still watch the last ferry depart, watch those passenger counts, and some nights they match perfectly, and some nights they don't. I've learned to recognize them now, the ones who board but never arrive. I see them in their old clothes, their patient faces, their complete lack of phones or bags or any of the things the living carry. I see them walk onto that boat believing this time will be different. This time, they'll make it home. And I've learned something else. Something the guy from Bainbridge never told me, but I figured out on my own. When the count is off, when those extra passengers board, I always check the weather reports from 1952. And every single time, it matches. The fog, the temperature, the wind direction, identical to the night they died. Like the water itself remembers, and on certain nights when conditions are just right, it gives them another chance. They never make it. They board in Seattle and they vanish before Bainbridge, returning to the cold sound that took them 73 years ago. But they keep trying, and I keep counting. Because someone needs to bear witness. Someone needs to remember that 73 people got on a ferry one night in 1952 and never came home. Sometimes I wonder if they know. If somewhere in whatever loop they're trapped in, they understand that they're looking for a home that doesn't exist anymore. Trying to return to families that have long since died themselves. I wonder if that makes it better or worse. I don't take the ferry anymore, not even during the day. Because now, when I look at that water, all I can think about is what's underneath. And what still tries, night after night, to cross it. There's a particular kind of silence in a hospital at 3 in the morning. It's not peaceful. It's suspended, like the building itself is holding its breath between one emergency and the next. I cleaned operating rooms for 6 years at a Seattle medical center, and I learned to navigate that silence, to work within it, to respect it. The surgical wing was my domain after midnight. Mop, disinfect, restock, prepare each room for the next day's procedures. Routine work, honest work, until I was given the key to operating room 7. They waited 2 months before they told me about it. 2 months of watching me work, I suppose, seeing if I'd last, seeing if I could be trusted. My supervisor pulled me aside one night in November, handed me a key on a red tag, and said, "Room 7 needs cleaning tonight. Hasn't been done in 3 weeks." I asked why they'd let it go that long. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and said, "You'll understand. Just finish before dawn. And don't call me while you're in there. Wait until you're out. Room 7 was at the end of the west corridor, past the other ORs, past the recovery bays, in a section of the wing that felt older somehow, like it belonged to an earlier version of the hospital. The key stuck in the lock. I had to force it, and when the door finally opened, the smell hit me first. Not decay or rot. Worse than that. Antiseptic and copper and something underneath, something organic that the chemicals couldn't quite mask. The room looked like every other OR I'd cleaned. Steel tables, surgical lights hanging like mechanical flowers, monitors against the walls, supply cabinets locked and labeled. Except the floor had a stain. Dead center under where the table sat, a discoloration in the tile that no amount of mopping had ever removed. Brown, roughly circular, about 3 feet across. I started the way I always did. Cleared the biohazard containers, wiped down surfaces, began mopping from the corners inward. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular frequency that gets inside your skull. I'd been working maybe 20 minutes when I heard it. A voice. Male. Calm. Clinical. Clamp. I need the clamp now. I froze. Looked up. The room was empty. Just me and my mop bucket and that persistent hum of lights. I waited, listening, but heard nothing else. Old building, I told myself. Sound carries strange through ventilation systems. I went back to mopping. 3 minutes later, a different voice. Female this time, younger, stressed. Pressure's dropping. We're losing him. The mop handle slipped in my hands. I turned in a slow circle, searching for speakers, for intercoms, for any rational source. Nothing. The voices were coming from the room itself, from the air, from nowhere I could identify. Then the first voice again, still calm but with an edge now. Suction. More suction. I can't see the bleeder. And suddenly I could hear all of them. 4, maybe 5 voices overlapping. The steady beep of monitors, the hiss of ventilators, the rustle of surgical gowns, and the snap of gloves. A full surgical team, invisible, performing an operation in the exact space where I stood. I should have left. Every instinct screamed to drop the mop and walk out. But something kept me there. Not courage, not curiosity, but a horrible certainty that if I stayed, if I listened, I would understand something I wasn't supposed to know. He's coding. Start compressions. The female voice, no longer stressed but urgent, professional, doing her job even as catastrophe unfolded. I heard the compressions, rhythmic, mechanical, 1, 2, 3, 4. Heard someone counting, heard the charge of a defibrillator, that rising whine, then the thump of a discharge. Once, twice, 3 times. Time? The first voice asked. A pause, then another voice, male, quiet. 83 minutes. Call it. Silence, absolute. The monitors, the voices, the rustling, all of it cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I stood in that empty room, mop in hand, and realized I was shaking. I finished cleaning. I don't know why. Maybe because leaving felt like abandonment, like turning my back on something sacred. I mopped that stained floor, wiped down the table, restocked supplies. The whole time, the room felt heavy, compressed, like the air pressure was wrong. When I finally locked the door behind me at 4:47 a.m., my hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the key twice. My supervisor was waiting in the break room. She had coffee ready, slid a cup across the table to me before I could speak. "Sit down," she said. I sat, drank. The coffee was too sweet, but I needed it. "Room 7, she began. "Hasn't been used for surgery in 11 years. Not since a procedure went wrong. Liver transplant, young patient, mid-20s. Everything was routine until it wasn't. Bleeder they couldn't locate. Pressure dropped. They worked on him for 83 minutes before the surgeon called time of death. I stared at her. I heard them. I heard the whole thing. She nodded. Everyone does. Every cleaner we've sent in there for the past 11 years hears it. Same voices, same sequence, same 83 minutes, though you usually only catch fragments depending on when you enter. It plays on a loop. Starts at 2:47 a.m. That's when they made the first incision. Ends at 4:10. That's when they called it. Why? My voice came out hoarse. Why does it keep happening? The surgeon, she said, looking into her coffee, blamed himself. Quit 2 months later. Died by suicide 6 months after that. We think... She paused, choosing words carefully. We think maybe he's still trying. Still in that room, trying to find the bleeder, trying to save a patient who's been dead for over a decade. Or maybe it's the room itself. Maybe some moments are so traumatic they burn into a place, and the place just keeps replaying them. I thought about that stain on the floor, about how many times it had been mopped, scrubbed, treated with every chemical we had, and still it remained, a shadow of blood that wouldn't fade. Why do we still clean it? I asked. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression. Not fear, but a deep, tired sadness. Because someone has to bear witness. Because that surgeon and that team and that patient deserve to have someone remember what happened in that room, even if it's just a cleaner at 3 a.m, listening to ghosts repeat their worst moment over and over. I cleaned room 7 every 3 weeks after that. Always at night, always alone, and every time, without fail, I heard them. Sometimes I'd catch the beginning, the calm preparations, the routine checklist before incision. Sometimes I'd arrive during the crisis, voices tight with controlled panic. Once, I was there for the end. Heard that quiet voice say, 83 minutes. Heard the surgeon call time of death. Heard the aftermath silence that was somehow worse than any sound. I learned things listening to those ghosts. I learned how a team functions under pressure, how they communicate in crisis, how they fight for a life even when they know they're losing. I learned that dying isn't always fast or dramatic. Sometimes it's a slow leak you can't find. A pressure that drops degree by degree while skilled hands do everything right and still fail. I learned the patient's age from their conversations. 26. I learned he'd been sick for years, waiting for that transplant, that this surgery was supposed to be his second chance. I learned the surgeon's voice, how it changed over those 83 minutes from confident to concerned to quietly devastated. I learned the names they never used anymore. Called out in urgent moments, asking for instruments, for readings, for help that couldn't change the outcome. And I learned that some places don't let go of their dead. Room 7 held on to that night, replayed it endlessly, trapped everyone who'd been there in an eternal loop of attempted salvation and inevitable loss. The hospital administration knew. They'd locked the room, stopped scheduling surgeries there, but they couldn't seal it off completely because somehow it seemed wrong to abandon it entirely. So they sent cleaners in, kept it maintained, kept it ready as if someday the loop might break and the surgery might finally, impossibly succeed. I don't work there anymore. Left 2 years ago for a day shift at a different facility. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about room 7. Wonder if they're still there. Still fighting to save a man who died before I ever set foot in that hospital. Wonder if the surgeon's ghost knows his patient is gone, or if he's trapped in those 83 minutes forever, searching for a bleeder he'll never find. And I wonder if maybe that's what hell is. Not fire or torment, but being trapped in your worst moment, the moment you failed. Unable to move forward or back, just repeating it endlessly while strangers mop the floor around you and try not to cry at the hopelessness of it all. I never told anyone else what I heard. But I always finished cleaning that room, always restocked it properly, always treated it with the care it deserved. Because that surgeon and his team, wherever they are, they're still trying, still fighting. And the least I could do was make sure their operating room stayed clean. Working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner teaches you things about humanity you don't learn anywhere else. You see people at their lowest and their strangest. Insomniacs seeking communion over burnt coffee. Shift workers too tired to make it home. The lonely who have nowhere else to be at 3 a.m. You learn to read regulars, to know their orders before they sit down, to understand that sometimes your diner is the only warm place left in someone's cold world. But in 6 years working the overnight counter at the Capitol Hill Diner, I never understood the man in the brown jacket. Not until the night I learned he'd been dead for 41 years. He started coming in about 2 months after I began working there. Always the same time, 3:17 a.m. You could set your watch by it. Always alone, always sat at the counter, third stool from the left, the one with the torn red vinyl we kept meaning to replace. He'd order coffee, black, and a slice of whatever pie we had left. He'd read a newspaper while he ate, and I mean a physical newspaper, the kind nobody carries anymore, already folded to the local news section. He never spoke beyond his order, never made eye contact, just ate his pie, drank his coffee, left exact change down to the penny, and walked out. The strange thing, and I didn't notice this for weeks, was that his coffee never steamed. Even when I poured it fresh from the pot that had just finished brewing, even in the cold Seattle autumn, that cup never produced a single wisp of steam. And he never pulled out a phone, never checked it, never scrolled, never even seemed to have one. In 2025, that alone made him remarkable. When I asked my coworker about him one night, she'd been there 12 years, knew every regular by name and story. When I described the man in the brown jacket, she went quiet, wiped down the same section of counter 3 times before she answered. "You see him too." "What do you mean, too?" She glanced toward the door, then back at me. "That customer has been coming here since before I started. Same time, same order, same routine. I asked the owner about him once. She said he'd been coming in since the 80s, since before this place renovated, back when it was still called Roy's. She said..." She paused, choosing words carefully. She said not to bother him, that he wasn't hurting anyone, that some routines are sacred. That should have been enough. I should have left it alone, served his coffee and pie without question. Accepted the mystery the way the diners seemed to have accepted it decades ago. But something about him haunted me. The way he read those newspapers, not skimming, but genuinely reading, absorbing, as if the news still mattered. The way he never seemed to age. The way he moved through the diner like he was slightly out of sync with everything else. A half-second delay between his actions and the world around him. So I started paying attention. Real attention. I noticed the newspaper he read was always the Seattle Times. But the masthead looked wrong, old-fashioned. The font different from current issues. I noticed his clothes. The brown jacket, yes. But also the shirt underneath, the cut of his pants, the style of his shoes. Nothing modern. Nothing from this decade or the last. Everything about him belonged to another time. One night in February, during a brief moment when the diner was empty except for him, I worked up the courage. As I refilled his coffee, watching again as no steam rose from the black surface, I asked, "That paper you're reading, where do you get it?" He looked up at me. First time in 4 months he'd actually met my eyes. His gaze was strange, distant, like he was seeing me from very far away. "I buy it every night," he said. His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming through a long tunnel. "Before my shift. Same corner, same vendor." "Your shift?" "Night driver. Buses." He returned to his paper. "Route 7. Gets me home by dawn if the traffic's clear." My skin went cold. Route 7. I knew Seattle's bus routes. Route 7 ran north-south, Rainier Beach to the U District. And it hadn't run a night shift since the late 90s, when Metro restructured. "You drive for Metro?" 22 years, he said, not looking up. "Good job. Quiet at night. Let me think." I went to the back, pulled out my phone with shaking hands, Googled Seattle bus driver death 1984. Took me 15 minutes of searching through archived news sites, old accident reports, digitized obituaries. Then I found it. March 14th, 1984. Night driver, Route 7. Killed in intersection accident at Rainier and Jackson. Hit by a drunk driver running a red light at 4:03 a.m. on his way home from his shift. The article included a photo. Younger, but unmistakably him. Same brown jacket, same serious expression. Dead at 41 years old. I walked back out to the counter. He was finishing his pie, folding his newspaper the way he always did, careful and precise. He stood, placed his exact change on the counter, $2.35, what coffee and pie cost in 1984, and turned toward the door. "Wait," I said. My voice came out barely a whisper. He paused, didn't turn around. "That intersection, Rainier and Jackson, do you—" I couldn't finish. "I never make it past there," he said quietly. "Every night I leave here, walk to where I parked, get in the car, start driving. And every night, at Rainier and Jackson, there's a moment of light. Too bright, too fast. And then I'm walking into this diner again at 3:17, and it's always the same night, and I can never get home." He turned to face me then, really face me. And I saw something in his expression that broke my heart, not fear, not confusion, but a deep, exhausted sadness, an awareness. "I know I'm dead," he said. "Have known for a while now. Or maybe I've always known and just couldn't accept it. The newspaper never changes date. My coffee's never hot. Nobody else in here ever sees me except the staff, and only certain ones. You see me. She sees me." He nodded toward my coworker. "The owner sees me, but the customers, they look right through me like I'm not here." I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a ghost who knows he's a ghost? "Why do you keep coming?" I finally asked. He smiled. It was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Because I'm trying to get home. I have a wife waiting. Had. I don't know anymore. Time is strange for me now. But every night I think maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time I'll make it past that intersection. Maybe this time I'll walk through my door and she'll be there, and it'll be morning, and I'll have survived another shift." He looked down at his hands. But I never do. I get in my car, I drive, and there's always that light. And then I'm back here, starting over. "How long?" I whispered. "For me? Feels like a few weeks. But the newspapers you all read, the way you dress, the things you don't even notice anymore." He gestured vaguely at the world beyond the diner. "I know it's been longer. Decades, maybe. The city I drive through gets a little more different every time, a a few more buildings I don't recognize. Streets rerouted in ways that confuse me. But I can't stop. This diner, this coffee, this routine, it's the last normal thing I have. Everything after this is the accident, over and over. So I come here first, and I pretend I'm still alive. Still on my way home from an honest night's work. Still a person who exists in the world. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Thank you for seeing me, for asking. Most people don't anymore. I think I've been fading for a while now. One day I'll come in and nobody will see me at all. And maybe that's when I'll finally stop trying to get home. When there's nobody left to remember I was ever here. The door opened, closed. He stepped out onto the Capitol Hill Street, walked south toward where Rainier Avenue began its descent toward the valley. I watched through the window until he disappeared around the corner, heading toward an intersection he would never pass and a home he would never reach. I served his coffee and pie the next night, and the night after, and every night at 3:17 for the next 8 months I worked there. He never spoke to me again, but sometimes, when I poured his coffee, he'd nod slightly in acknowledgement, a small gesture of gratitude for being seen. I left that job eventually, moved to a different part of the city. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about him. Wonder if he's still walking into that diner every night at 3:17. Still ordering his coffee and pie. Still reading newspapers from 1984. Still trying to make it home to a wife who, if she's still alive, would be in her 80s now, having lived 41 years without him. And I think about all the other ghosts that might be trapped in routines we don't notice. The commuter who takes the same train every morning, even though the line shut down. The worker clocking into a factory that was demolished. The child walking to a school that closed. All of them caught in loops, trying to complete journeys that ended decades ago. Invisible to everyone, except the few of us who work the hours when the living and the dead share the same spaces. I hope he made it home eventually. I hope one night that light at Rainier and Jackson didn't come, and he drove past it, and he walked through his door, and someone was waiting. But I don't think he did. I think he's still there, still trying, still hoping that this night will be different. Some people never make it home. They just keep walking toward it forever. There's something oddly soothing about being the only security officer in a sprawling glass and steel tech building in the dead of the night. You get used to the low drone of servers, your own footsteps echoing on the marble, the soft sighs of the HVAC system shifting in the rafters above. The screens glow blue, and you feel important. Not because you're paid well or carry a radio, but because everything is yours for those silent hours. Every shadow, every corridor, every keycard beep. Until the night the badge with a terminated profile started clocking in. I know you think you'd just log it, call it a system glitch. But this isn't about technology at all. It's about a digital shadow that wanted to come home. I worked the overnight shift at a South Lake Union campus, a job that was supposed to be temporary. Watch the feeds. Patrol the halls. If a badge set off an alert, match the name, check the camera, move on. But one Friday, right at 2:11 a.m., the old black and white terminals flashed red. Building C, North Basement, access granted. The screen scrolled a name I'd never seen in any live team briefings. Curious, I checked the personnel list. Deceased. Termination. Accidental death. Effective date, 2 years ago. Maybe you're thinking, computers make mistakes. Maybe I thought so at first. But I followed procedure, pulled up the badge logs, and there it was. Activity peppered through months of quiet nights, only ever between midnight and 3, only ever for Building C. The peculiarity was, Building C wasn't standing anymore. It had been condemned, then demolished, nothing but a gravel lot with some fencing and construction debris. The badge should have been wiped, the profile sealed with its owner's obituary. It didn't stop with access logs. Camera feeds for the old elevator flickered on, then pixelated to grayscale snow. A shape, almost humanoid, moved through the vestibule. No face, but the outline of a person. Tall, thin, carrying what might have been a satchel or a laptop bag, gliding instead of walking. I felt it before I saw it. That prickling behind the ears, the click at the base of the neck as if you've just been called, not by someone outside you, but by something in the marrow. Would you have gotten up from your desk? Would you have patrolled that dead part of the campus just because a system built for predictability glitched at 2 in the morning? I shouldn't have gone. But I did. My flashlight trembled across torn caution tape. Puddles reflecting the city's jaundiced light, the shadows of what used to be offices lingering in the empty air. I could hear the badge door, a distinct mechanical clunk, the kind that shouldn't have echoed anymore. And I found a door. Not a real one, but a security relay fixed to a rebar skeleton, half buried in construction dust. I scanned it. A beep. Access granted. My own code, working for a door that technically didn't exist. The air changed, got cold in a way central air can't mimic, the kind that seeps in with grief or the memory of bad news. My radio crackled. A voice, digital and stuttering, whispered, "Still working. Almost done. You see me?" I froze, the hair on my arms rising. For an awful, shivering moment, I felt fingers graze the back of my hand, a static shock, but longer, deliberate, pleading. Back at main security, badge logs now populated with entry after entry, everyone in Building C. Inside the system, I, sat at a desk by server racks, typing looping lines of code. Still working, optimizing, be done soon. The logs ran from 2 years ago to right now. I asked the head of IT. Quiet guy, ex-Army, didn't spook easy. He listened. His face barely shifted, but his eyes darted left, right. "We archived everything from that fatal incident," he admitted. Building C had a hardware fire. One programmer died in the server room trying to finish a network patch after everyone else had gone home. No next of kin. HR closed out the profile, but for months, the badge kept logging activity nobody could verify. Same window, between midnight and 3. He stared at his hands. It's not supposed to be possible. Wiped means wiped. But sometimes there are residues. You ever try to delete a file and it just keeps coming back, no matter how many times you scrub your drive? I started thinking about code as something more than just instructions. It's memory, just not always ours. Maybe someone dies with something unfinished, and the system can't help but try to complete the task. From then on, it got worse. Late nights, my screens flickered every time the terminated badge pinged the network. Elevators rumbled from the ghost side of the build logs. Lights snapped on in unpowered rooms. Once, I came into work to find lines of code scrolling on my own locked computer, ending with, "Still here, not done. Please." There was a sadness in it, like someone endlessly clocking into a shift they'll never finish. There are nights I can barely tell if I'm awake now, or stuck in a loop like him. The only thing I'm sure of is that badge. I locked it in a metal box, buried in construction rubble, hoping the system could finally rest. Terminated, still flashes up sometimes, like a heartbeat glitch in the ether. I don't tell anyone new about it. Security shifts rotate. Systems get replaced. But on certain nights, when the city's quiet and the servers hum just so, I check the badge logs and know to never call something erased just because the rules say it should be. Some pieces of us get left behind, digitized and repeating, always just about to finish, always almost done, working through the night while we sleep. And maybe, if you stay up as late as I do, you'll spot a door where none should exist, and you'll understand. What we leave unfinished can haunt anyone. If they sit still long enough to hear it clock in again, that's what the night shift in Building C taught me. Some things can't be logged out. Some codes keep running, even after the lights are off. You never really understand what it means to be alone in a city until you've patrolled a parking garage at 2 in the morning. There's a myth that the city is always awake. That's a lie, or maybe a wish. Because nothing, no amount of neon, no echo of distant traffic, no late-night laughter that leaks up from the street, can truly reach you when you're standing in the concrete heart of a downtown parking structure. Radio in hand, hunting for movement in a place where nothing is supposed to move. This is what draws certain people to the job, I think. The invisible, the overlooked, those who understand that silence is not the absence of sound, but the slow pressure of something waiting to be noticed. I started the graveyard shift as a fill-in. 1 week, third-party contractor, cover vacations, and sick days. It was easy money, or so I thought. Lock the entry at midnight, sweep the levels, write incident reports no one reads. By my second night, I'd memorized the way my footsteps echoed against the pillars, how my breath clouded in the winter gloom, the metallic taste that never quite left my mouth. Like the garage itself exhaled old machinery and fear. By the third night, I had started to count the parked cars. Obsessively. Each hour, each floor, I would tally every vehicle. Because of the silver sedan in spot 237. Spot 237 sits on the 4th level, right across from the elevator shaft, a nerve center for the entire garage. No matter what time I made my rounds, that silver sedan was always there. Old, but not classic. Meticulously clean, windows barely tinted, a single bumper sticker faded to illegibility. But here's the thing. It never appeared in the entry logs. It wasn't there when my shift started, wasn't there when I finished. Except, in a way, it always was. Other nights, it would be gone at roll call, then parked there after a 10-minute sweep. I tried to tell myself there was a rational explanation. Contractor cars, bad circuits, maybe a mechanical error in the camera system. On the 4th night, my 5th lap, I heard the car door slam. Not faint, not distant. Right there behind me. But when I turned, nothing. Just the sedan, still as a photograph. Dustless and perfect. Something scratched my mind then, a memory I didn't want. 3 years ago, a body had been found in that very spot. A woman, graveyard shift. Nobody claimed her for days. They had to pry the car open. It had locked itself, resisted every key card and override. It was all in the incident logs, the ones you read once, then file away. I never thought about her. Not until I found the sedan in 237. Later, as I crossed past 237 during my rounds, my radio clicked on without cause. Loud, white noise, then a voice, quieter than static. I can't get out. I dropped it, heart jackhammering in my chest. Pride kept me from running, but my legs screamed otherwise. I tried the emergency phone. Dead. My keycards now blinked red, one after the other. I circled to the stairwell, breathing sharp, convinced the echoing footsteps ahead of me belonged to someone or something else. For the rest of the shift, I avoided the fourth floor. I sat in the booth, locking my eyes on the security cameras. Every now and then, a motion alert triggered on the screen for 237. No one ever got in or out. Just that car, shivering slightly beneath the fluorescent lights. At dawn, when people trickled in for their morning commutes, the car was gone. The spot was empty, not even a trace on the polished cement. No oil drip, no tire prints, no imprint in the overnight frost. But there was something else. Taped to the back of my office chair, a ticket stub, just a scrap of pink paper, faded along the edges, time-stamped 3 years ago to the day. Entry, 11:54 p.m. No exit. The next night, I almost didn't come back. Almost. I convinced myself it was fatigue, imagination, boredom's cruel trick. I had to know. I had to see if the car would return, if the voices would follow. Midnight came and went. I did my circuit, each floor, heart in my mouth as I came to the crest of 237. There it was. Perfect silver, collecting neither dust nor dew. I sidled up close, not touching, just looking for any sign of life. My breath froze as I peered inside. There was a shape in the driver's seat. Not a silhouette, no features, no face. Just the suggestion of a person pressed into the upholstery, shivering with every pass of my flashlight, but never solid. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, stepped back, and when I looked again, it was gone. The seat empty, except for a faint handprint in the fogged window. 5 small fingers pressed outward, as if asking to be released. I checked the logs again. No record. I checked the old incident reports, piecing together the story in quiet, sleepless hours, with nothing but the hum of computers for company. She'd been last seen on the security feed at 3:08 a.m., entering the garage alone. The system that failed to open her door, the blackout that erased an hour of footage. EMS called at dawn. They never found her phone, her keys, nothing except a notebook in the glove compartment. Pages written and erased, looped handwriting, only one sentence untouched. I'm still here. I'm not done. On my last night, I made one final round. 4th level, spot 237. I stood in the cold, the air heavy with exhaust and regret. I didn't speak, didn't touch the car. I listened. The silence felt thick, oppressive, as if the garage itself was waiting, watching, hoping I might unlock whatever kept the car anchored to this place. The lights overhead stuttered, flickered. In that brief, strobing moment, I saw them. Dozens of cars, each one with a figure in the driver's seat, staring forward, waiting for a dawn that never comes. I handed in my badge the next morning. I've never told anyone at the company what I saw. But sometimes, when I pass a parking structure in the city at night, when the roads are empty and the world feels hollowed out and barely real, I think about spot 237. About the woman who never made it out, whose car appears without reason, whose handprint lingers on the glass like an accusation. And I wonder, in those moments when I catch my own reflection in a pane of glass, just how many of us are still circling somewhere, trapped between floors, between shifts, between the world that moves on and the memory that cannot. If you work graveyard, remember your count. Remember who's meant to leave before daylight. And if you ever see a silver sedan in a half-lit corner, don't get too close. Some stories want company. Some doors only open for those who are willing to stay after hours, counting cars that the city has already forgotten. I worked nights as a park ranger out at Discovery Park long enough to know there's a difference between being alone in the woods and being unwatched. Most people who hike that place in daylight think the creepiest part is the old military housing, the abandoned duplexes, the graffiti, the boarded-up windows. But all of that feels like a movie set when the sun's still up. It's at 2 in the morning, with the wind coming off the sound and the fog crawling in from the bluff, that you start to feel the layers under the park, the fort, the drills, the people who never really left. If we were sitting together right now, I'd tell you flat out. The scariest thing I've ever seen wasn't a shadow in the trees. It was something my eyes couldn't see at all. My shift covered the whole park, but those old Fort Lawton areas were my responsibility. Patrols through the abandoned barracks, checks on the locked buildings, making sure no one was camping where they shouldn't. Most of it was routine. Kids sneaking in to drink, the occasional squatter, coyotes watching from the tree line like disinterested neighbors. The department gave us a thermal monocular a couple of years back, mostly to help spot people at night without shining bright beams into every bush. Handy tool. It reads heat signatures. Warm bodies show up as white or orange, cooler stuff goes darker. Animals, people, even engine blocks that were running recently. You get used to reading the world that way. It was a January night, clear and cold enough that my breath came out in long, pale streams. The sky above the park was darker than the city glow behind it. Stars faint but visible. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Even the hum of the city felt like it had taken a step back. I was walking the loop near the old barracks row, long, low buildings with boarded windows and peeling paint, standing in a line like tired soldiers. My flashlight traced over doorways, already secured earlier. Nothing out of place. Then my radio crackled. Unit on Lawton Loop. Any chance you can sweep the officers' row again? We had a noise complaint from the neighborhood. Someone thought they heard voices. I glanced over at the empty structures. No light leaking from anywhere, no movement. On it, I answered. And because it was cold and my fingers needed a distraction, I pulled out the thermal and took a lazy sweep across the fronts of the buildings. The barracks glowed in dull shapes, just retained heat from the day, a little warmer than the air. Trees and bushes were nearly black. The road was a faint ribbon. Nothing weird. I started walking, scanning, footsteps crunching on frosty pavement. When I got to the last building in the row, I swung the thermal across one more time and stopped so fast my boot slipped on the frost. There was a man standing in front of the last barracks. On the screen, he was bright. Hot white, edges glowing orange. A perfect, clear signature. Human height, human shape, facing the building with his back slightly toward me, like he was on guard. I lowered the monocular on instinct, heart hammering, and aimed my naked eyes at the spot. Nothing. Just empty space. Sidewalk, patch of grass, the shadow of a fir tree leaning over the old brick. No person, no figure. I raised the thermal again. He was still there. If you've never had your senses disagree that violently, you won't understand how wrong it feels. My eyes said, "You are alone." The device that had never lied to me before said, "No, you're not." "Hey," I called out, because protocol and fear were wrestling in my chest, and protocol won by a breath. "Park ranger. You're not supposed to be here after hours." The figure didn't move. I took a couple of steps closer, keeping the monocular up. On the screen, I saw his head tilt slightly, like he'd heard me but wasn't sure whether it mattered. His outline was crisp, cap or helmet, what looked like a coat that hung straight down, arms close to his sides, not hunched like a trespasser. Standing at ease, my mouth was dry. "You need to show me your hands," I said, falling into the script we use with uncooperative people. Slowly. Nothing. Not a twitch. Then he turned. Not fast. It was almost casual. His upper body rotated toward me, slow and fluid, as if he were pivoting on the balls of his feet. On the thermal, his face was just a brighter oval. No features, just heat. But the instant that blank oval aligned with my position, my whole body lit up with a sensation I can only describe as being looked at too hard. In regular night vision, there was still nothing in front of me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. A crow called once from some unseen branch, sharp and jarring. The air, already cold, seemed to thin another degree. "Radio check," I said quietly, pressing my shoulder mic partly to ground myself. Lawton Loop's clear for noise, but I'm going to do an extended foot patrol." "Copy," dispatch replied. "Everything okay up there?" I hesitated, looking back through the thermal. The figure had taken a step toward me now, just one stride, but it closed more distance than it should have. Like the space between us wasn't behaving. Still bright, still human-shaped, still invisible to my naked eyes. "Yeah," I lied. "Just being thorough." When I let go of the mic, the radio hissed with a soft burst of static that almost sounded like words. I told myself it was in my head. I kept the monocular up and walked backward, not wanting to turn my back on whatever it was. The figure moved too, not in sync with my steps exactly, but in a pattern that kept the distance between us nearly the same. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't advancing like a threat. He was shadowing me. Like we were on the same patrol route and he'd just decided to mirror my pace. The old officers' houses loomed to my right, their dark windows blank. In another life, men had stood where I was standing, smoking, talking, leaning of an evening, unaware that decades later some other night worker would be sharing the sidewalk with one of them. The thought came uninvited and nasty. What if he thinks you're the ghost? I almost laughed out of sheer panic. A small choked sound escaped me instead. "Look," I said, because I had to say something, even if I was talking to empty air. "If you can hear me, you're not in trouble, okay? I just need you to, I don't know, let me finish my job without losing my mind." For the first time, the figure reacted. He stopped. Just stopped moving, dead still in the thermal view. The bright oval of his head dipped, as if he'd tilted it slightly, considering me. The air around me thickened. I could smell something faintly metallic, like old pennies and gun oil, the kind of scent shooting ranges have baked into their walls. I lowered the thermal, pulse pounding. There was still nothing there. I took a deep breath that tasted like rust and salt air and something stale. "Were you stationed here?" I asked the dark. "At Fort Lawton?" Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, more like a full room where everyone has suddenly gone quiet to listen. I lifted the monocular again. He was closer now. Too close. 10 feet away at most, body angled toward me, that blank, glowing oval fixed on my spot. For a second, a sharper heat flared at his chest area, like a burst of intense warmth, before dimming again. The monocular's gain flickered with it. Scrambling to adjust. There's a thing they teach you about old bases like this. A lot of stories never made it into the official records. Training accidents, fights, people who went AWOL and were quietly buried in paperwork rather than in the ground. Standing there with that heat signature in front of me, it hit me that maybe some of them never left their posts. I see you, I heard myself say. I can't see you, but I see you on this. I held up the device a little, half ridiculous, like I was showing a photo. You're still on duty, aren't you? The wind rustled through the dry grass. An old metal sign creaked faintly on a loose bolt. The figure stayed fixed in place, bright and solid in the thermal lens. Then, ever so slightly, he lifted one arm. Not fast, not aggressive. The motion was smooth, practiced. Hand up, elbow bent. A perfect, unmistakable military salute. From the outside, if someone had been watching me, it would have looked like I was staring at nothing on an empty road, suddenly choking on air. But through the lens, that glowing silhouette held the salute for a long heartbeat, then slowly lowered it. The metallic smell was stronger now. Under it, another note. A faint whiff of sweat, wool, canvas. The ghosts of old uniforms. I did the only thing that felt right. I raised my own hand, fingers to the brim of my cap, and returned the salute. I swear to you, the temperature around me dropped like someone had opened a freezer. The thermal image flared bright white one last time, then thinned, lines blurring, edges dissolving. Within 3 seconds, the space where he'd stood was as dark and cool as the trees behind him. Gone. Just gone. The metallic scent faded. Somewhere in the distance, a barred owl called, its hoot normal and almost stupidly alive. The night slid back into its usual shape. I stood there shaking for maybe a full minute, the monocular hanging useless in my hand. Eventually, I managed to key the radio. "Lawton Loop all clear," I said, voice rough. "No further noise, continuing patrol." "Copy," dispatch replied. "Nice and quiet night up there, huh?" I almost laughed. "Yeah," I said. "Nice and quiet." I finished my shift. I walked past that row of barracks twice more before dawn, thermal clipped back to my belt, eyes resolutely on the physical world. I didn't see him again. But the next time I pulled the device up, out of habit, the first thing I saw was my own heat signature reflected in a dark window. Bright, alive, temporary. You can choose not to believe any of this. You can say I was tired, half frozen, spooked by too many old stories. Maybe that's what I'd tell myself if it had only happened once. But that wasn't the last time the thermal picked up something my eyes couldn't. What stuck with me from that night isn't the fear. It's the posture. The way he stood. The way he saluted. Like the land itself had assigned him a post. Watch this empty road, these abandoned barracks, this park built on old orders that never got fully canceled. So if you ever find yourself in Discovery Park after dark, ignoring the closed signs because you think the rules don't apply to you, and you get the sudden, ice-cold feeling that you're being appraised by someone you can't see, do yourself a favor. Straighten up a little. Keep your voice down. Maybe even nod once at the shadows in front of those crumbling barracks. Some posts in this city are still manned, not by cameras, not by living rangers, but by whatever refuses to stand down, even decades after the war moved on. I used to think being a tour guide in the Seattle Underground was just a gimmick job, a way to dress up history with a few spooky jokes and collect tips from tourists who wanted to feel like they'd brushed against something old. If you've ever taken one of those tours, you know the script. The Great Seattle Fire, the city built on top of itself, the buried storefronts and half-forgotten staircases. You get your laughs, your little jumps, your safe shivers. Then you go back up into the light and tell yourself it was all just stories. I thought that too. Until the night my last tour refused to end. And I realized not everyone on my route was from the same century as me. Let me sit beside you for a second and lay this out like I'm back in that briefing room, coffee in hand, trying to convince someone to believe me. My shift was the late one. Last tour at 11, lock up close to midnight. The underground after hours is its own animal. No chatter, no cameras clicking, just stale air and the faint smell of damp brick and old wood swelling with moisture. The city up above keeps moving. Buses, sirens, late-night bars. But it all comes down through the cracks as a muffled pressure, not real sound. Down there, time behaves strange. Every guide will tell you that, even the skeptical ones. That night, my group was small. A couple on a date, 2 out-of-town friends looking for something authentically creepy, and one guy who joined last minute, paying cash at the door. I noticed him because he was plain. That sounds rude, but that's the only way to say it. Plain in a way people aren't anymore. Dark wool coat, simple trousers, scuffed shoes, no visible brand logos or phone in his hand. You know how everyone these days carries themselves like they're aware of being watched, aware of cameras? He didn't have that. He stood like a man waiting for a streetcar in an old photograph. Patient, slightly hunched from work, eyes tired but curious. We started the tour. I did my usual patter about the fire of 1889, the rebuilding, the decision to raise the streets and leave whole storefronts buried below. The couple laughed at the right spots. The friends kept taking pictures with their phones, flashes bouncing off glass and brick. The plain man just listened, never interrupted, never smiled, just watched me with his strange, hungry focus, like he was waiting for me to say something very specific. The underground is a maze of old sidewalks, storefronts, and sealed-off tunnels. The path for tours is controlled, a loop, really. You go down one set of stairs, cross a corridor of old shop fronts, pause at a few spots for stories, then climb a different staircase back into modern Pioneer Square. I'd walked that loop so many times, I could do it in my sleep. That's why it hit me so hard when it changed. Halfway through, we reached a junction where I normally turned right. Same roped-off area, same sign asking guests to stay with the group. Only now, there was a left-hand passage I had never seen before. Narrow, wider boards, brick archway warped at the top. No signs, no rope, no security camera. Just darkness leading away. I stopped talking mid-sentence. The couple almost bumped into me. One of the friends asked, "Hey, is that a new section?" Like it was part of the show. I turned, ready to say, "We don't go that way." But the plain man stepped closer, just enough that I caught a whiff of something old-fashioned, coal smoke, sweat, and something medicinal, like camphor. "We used to take that way," he said quietly. His voice was low, deep, threaded with an accent that wasn't foreign so much as old. Pacific Northwest, but from another era. Before they blocked it. Goes toward Front Street. No one calls it Front Street anymore. It's First Avenue now, has been for a long time. Hearing that name out loud in the dim tunnel sent a cold little spider skittering up my spine. The rational part of me piped up. Renovations, expansion, some new section the owners hadn't mentioned on the schedule. Maybe I'd missed a memo. My brain grabbed that explanation and held on tight. "We're going to stick to the marked route tonight," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Insurance and all that fun stuff. The plain man looked at me then, with something like disappointment. "You said you'd show us where the city really is," he murmured. Not just the parts they polished for visitors. The others didn't seem to hear him. They were busy aiming their phones at old signage, laughing about how people used to buy corsets and tonics in these little shops. I stood there in that junction, the familiar path to the right, the dark new passage to the left. And I realized something else. The air coming from that left-hand tunnel was warm, not the cool, controlled air of the current underground. Warm, like from a crowded room. And beneath the smell of dust, I caught a hint of something burning. Wood? No. Kerosene, maybe. Oil. The way a stove smells when it's on and left unattended. I should have called it in. Should have turned the group around, gone back up, told my manager. Instead, I did what a lot of people do right before their lives twist into a shape they don't recognize. I decided to go just a little farther. "We'll take a peek," I said. "Just a short detour. Stay behind me. Don't touch anything." The couple whooped. The friends were thrilled. Exclusive content for their feeds. The plain man just nodded once, like he'd known I'd give in. We stepped into the left-hand passage. The boards under my boots felt different, more uneven, with that particular softness old wood gets when it's soaked in decades of moisture and then dried again. The light from my flashlight seemed to get eaten faster than usual. The beam dimmed out after 10, 12 feet, like the darkness was thicker there. As we walked, the sound of the city above faded, replaced by something else. Faint at first, then clearer with each step. Footsteps, not ours. Dozens, maybe hundreds of feet, moving somewhere just beyond the walls. Horseshoes clanking on cobblestones, wagon wheels rattling. The murmur of voices speaking in that same old-time cadence you hear in reenactments. Faster, more clipped, less performative. It felt like being behind a stage set, while a real city played on the other side. "Do they have speakers down here?" one of the friends asked, sounding genuinely impressed. "This sound design is insane." I didn't answer. There were no speakers on my route map. No power cables along this corridor. The underground was mostly quiet by design. We sold the silence as part of the experience. We came to another junction. This one wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. To the right, the board sloped upward slightly, toward where I knew the exit should be. To the left, the passage narrowed and bent sharply out of sight. The air from that direction was warmer still, and the smell of smoke stronger. The plain man was now standing closer to me than anyone else. "This way," he said, gesturing left. "I was here when it burned. You should show them. It's part of the story, isn't it?" Something inside me recoiled. "What are you talking about?" "The fire," he said simply. "We smelled it before we saw it. That's how it always is. Smoke comes first, then the screaming." The couple shifted uneasily behind us. The bravado had gone out of their faces. "Hey, maybe we should just head back," one of them said. "Jokes are one thing, but—" "I'm not joking," the plain man said. And now there was an edge to his voice. Steel wrapped in exhaustion. He turned his head and looked back toward the path we'd come from. "You've noticed it, haven't you? The way the underground never quite matches the maps? The way you sometimes walk longer than you should between marked stops?" He was right. I'd chalked it up to my own bad sense of time, the hypnotic effect of walking tours night after night. I didn't say anything. "I took people through here too," he went on softly, almost to himself. "Different clothes, different script, same shadows." I kept thinking, if I told the story right, if I respected it, maybe the ground would finally settle. But it never did. The smell of smoke was making my eyes water now. I touched my cheek and my fingers came away damp, not from tears, but from condensation. The air was hotter, thicker. Somewhere ahead, Wood popped in that brittle way it does when it's burning. "Listen," I said, forcing myself to sound calm, like I was still in control. "We're turning around. This area is not part of the tour, and I don't know how stable it is. We're going back to the lit section." The friends and the couple didn't argue. You could feel the shift, the moment fun fear tips over into the real thing. They were ready to leave. But when I looked back down the passage we'd come from, my stomach dropped. It was longer. You know when you walk down a hallway and look back, expecting to see the door you just came through? Now imagine turning to see that door has receded 50, maybe 100 feet farther than it should be. That's what it felt like. The board stretched, warped by perspective that didn't make sense. The exit sign that should have been visible was gone, swallowed by the dark. "What the hell?" one of the friends muttered. We didn't walk that far. "Stay here," I said automatically, like there was anywhere else for them to go. I took 3 steps back toward where we'd entered. With each step, the voices on the other side of the walls grew louder. Shouts now, the crackle of fire, the scream of something heavy collapsing. The air tasted like ash. I stopped, suddenly sure that if I kept walking, I'd never stop. That the hallway would unspool in front of me forever, boards appearing as fast as my feet fell, always leading away from the exit, never toward it. The plane man hadn't moved. He was watching me with a sad sort of patience. "It's not you," he said. "It does that. It stretches. Keeps the ones who know too much from leaving too soon." "I don't know anything," I snapped, fear sharpening my words. "I'm just trying to do my job." He smiled without humor. "That's what you think." He tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. "They're almost here." "Who?" "The others." And then, as if on cue, they arrived. They didn't come into the passage. They came behind the walls. The sounds hit like a wave. Boots pounding wooden sidewalks, glass shattering, people yelling over each other in a dozen accents. Somewhere close by, a child cried out, then was abruptly cut off. The heat surged, rolling over us in an invisible tide. I smelled hair burning, fabric, human fear, which has its own scent once you've been around enough of it. The couple pressed together, breathing fast. One of the friends was whispering to himself, a stream of denial that sounded more like a prayer. The other raised his phone again, fingers shaking, and tried to film the corridor. The screen showed the passage, our group, and behind us, for a single glitching second, something else. Shapes moving through the boards, light flickering where no flame should be. Then the phone went dead. He swore, slapping it against his palm. Battery just tanked. It was at 60%. "Stop trying to record this," the plane man said quietly. "It's not for them." He nodded upward, toward the floor of the city above us. "It's for us." I realized then that his coat was wrong in a way I hadn't clocked before. The cut, the stitching, the way the fabric hung heavy, too heavy for modern synthetic blends. His shoes had nails in the soles. Tiny metal heads just visible in the worn leather. His collar was slightly frayed but carefully turned. Every part of him said, "Not from here, not from now." "How long have you been down here?" I asked. He looked past me, down the passage that led deeper into the heat. "Since the night the flames came under the doors," he said. "We thought it was just another small fire. We'd had them before. Someone shouted from the street, told us to get out. But there were customers, and the boss said we had time." His gaze shifted back to me. "We didn't. He took a step toward the left-hand bend, toward the roar we couldn't see but could feel. Every so often they open the path again, he said. Different guides, different groups. The city above is never the same, but down here, he gestured. Down here it's always that night. The same sequence. The same heat. The same people who never make it to the stairs. The instinct to run was so strong, it made my muscles ache. But where would I run to? The corridor behind me was wrong, lengthened, heavy with unseen bodies pushing between the walls. Ahead was fire. Beside me was a man who maybe had never climbed out. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. It came out small, stripped of all the banter and confidence I used on every tour. He looked at me with that same hungry focus he'd had at the start. But now there was something else in it too. Relief. "To remember," he said simply. "You walk people through our bones and tell them it's a story. You sell our burning as entertainment. But every time someone really hears us, really sees what this is, the ground settles a little. The city gets a bit more honest." He paused. "And maybe one day we can stop walking." The heat was unbearable now. Sweat rolled down my spine. The others were coughing, covering their mouths. Somewhere, a beam gave way, with a splintering crack that reverberated through the boards under our feet. "Close it," the plain man said, turning fully toward the bend for the first time. His face looked younger now, clearer, illuminated by a light we couldn't see. "Take them back the way you came. Don't bring anyone down this path again." "I don't know how," I said. "Yes, you do." He stepped forward, and for a brief, impossible instant, I saw the fire he was walking into. It wasn't literal flame, not like in a movie. It was an overlap, a second world sliding over ours, the boards becoming a sidewalk, the brick walls becoming storefront windows. People pressed against those windows, banging, screaming, smoke curling around their fingers. The air rippled, and through it all, the plain man leaned into the heat like a person stepping into a long-delayed embrace. "Tell them," he said, voice somehow both in front of me and from deep inside the wall. "Tell them we were here, and we burned, and we kept walking because no one would admit it was real." I blinked. The corridor snapped back into its ordinary wrongness. The heat faded in an instant, leaving only damp chill. The roaring became a memory. The plain man was gone. Behind me, the passage to the regular tour route had shrunk back to its normal length. The exit sign glowed green at the far end, exactly where it should be. I got my group out. Up the stairs, into the cool night air of Pioneer Square, their faces pale and drawn. No one spoke until we reached the sidewalk. Then the questions came all at once. Was that part of the tour? How did you do the heat effects? Why did the phones die? I heard myself laugh weakly, blame old building quirks, say something about them getting their money's worth. No one mentioned the plain man. When I brought him up, "You remember the guy in the wool coat?" They looked at me blankly. One of the friends frowned. "It was just us," he said. "You, me, my buddy, the couple. That's it." I checked the manifest later. 4 tickets. Cash count matched 4 admissions. Security footage from the entrance camera showed 4 guests walking in behind me. No one else. I quit that job a month later. Officially, it was burnout. Unofficially, it was because every time I started the late tour, I felt that left-hand passage waiting just beyond the edges of the route. I never turned toward it again. Kept the groups on the polished path, hit my marks, collected my tips, went home. But the whole time, I could sense that other corridor, the one that led into the night the city likes to forget. So if you ever take that tour and the guide makes a joke about the parts we don't show you, listen for what's underneath their voice. Listen for the boards creaking under more footsteps than you see. Listen for the echo of a man saying Front Street instead of First Avenue. And if, for whatever reason, you find yourself at a junction with a left-hand passage that feels too warm, smells faintly of smoke, and bends sharply out of sight, don't follow the guide if they decide to go that way. Don't take the detour. Some paths in Seattle were buried on purpose. Not to hide the history, but to keep the dead from walking their route over and over again with a fresh, unsuspecting audience. They asked not to be forgotten. Consider this your warning, and your invitation to remember them without ever setting foot where they still burn. I worked nights at Pike Place Market long enough to know the building has lungs. You can feel it breathe when they lock the front doors, air shifting through narrow stairwells, vents coughing, old wood settling like ribs. After midnight, the tourists are gone. The fish stalls are hosed down. The neon signs buzz low and tired. But the market doesn't sleep. It just stops pretending for the day crowd. If you were sitting next to me right now, I'd tell you this as quietly as I heard it the first time. The living are the guests here. The dead are the ones who stay. My shift started at 11 p.m. I was the night custodian for the lower levels. Those cramped corridors and tucked-away shops most people walk past without realizing how far down the building goes. You probably know the bright main level, the famous sign, the flying fish. I got the floors below that. The old cobbler shop, the antique stores, the quiet corners where the walls sweat history. My job was simple. Mop, sweep, empty bins, lock inner doors, and leave the place spotless before the morning vendors arrived. Simple. Until the night the walls started whispering. It was in November, the kind of wet Seattle cold that gets into your joints and sits there, heavy and patient. The crowd had thinned early. By midnight, I had the lower level to myself. The fluorescent lights hummed like a bad dream. I remember thinking how loud my own footsteps felt as I pushed the mop bucket down the narrow hallway by the old shoe repair shop. That hallway always gave me a weird feeling. Low ceiling, close walls, the smell of leather and glue still clinging to the wood, even though the shop had been closed for years. I was wringing out the mop when I heard it. A voice. Faint, muffled, like someone speaking from the other side of a thick door. I froze. The hallway was empty. Every shop gate was pulled down and locked. At first, I thought it was a radio somewhere, or maybe noise drifting from upstairs. But then another voice answered. Different tone, different pitch. And both of them were speaking in a language I didn't recognize. The sound was coming from the left wall, directly where the cobbler shop used to be. I stepped closer, pressing my ear against the cool plaster. The voices were clearer now, overlapping, quick and animated. I caught fragments that sounded like commands, questions, jokes. The rhythm was human, even if the words weren't. There was laughter, sharp, sudden, cut off like someone had slapped a hand over their own mouth. I pulled back and looked around, expecting to see someone standing there, some speaker I'd never noticed. Nothing. Just my mop, my bucket, and that long, empty corridor breathing around me. You know that feeling when you try to convince yourself you're not afraid? I went into that mode. I told myself it had to be pipes, or some weird acoustic trick pulling sound from the street. I forced myself to keep cleaning. But the more time I spent there, the more I started to recognize patterns. The same cadence, the same voices, repeating at different hours of the night. Always from that same stretch of wall. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing different languages. Some I could roughly place. Chinese, maybe an older dialect. The consonants clipped and musical. What might have been Italian? Words tumbling into each other like they were rolling downhill. Something else harder, harsher, maybe Eastern European. None of it matched the casual noise of tourists. It felt older, denser, like these people had come here for something specific and never left. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I brought my phone and opened a translation app, hit record, pressed the microphone against the wall. The voices were there, clear as anything. I listened along as the app tried to pick up words, and got nothing. Just static, a few misread syllables. Then an error. No language detected. But I heard them. I heard them so clearly that my brain began to fill in gaps. Like when you listen to a song in another language long enough and start to feel like you know what it means, even if you don't. They weren't just talking. They were working. The scrape of something heavy dragged across a floor. The clink of tools. The rustle of fabric. At one point, a child's voice cut through, high and insistent, followed by a sharper adult tone that made my stomach clench. Not words I knew, but the meaning was obvious. Be quiet. Don't draw attention. I asked one of the older daytime maintenance guys about the hallway. He gave me that look people get when they're trying to decide if they should lie or tell you something that'll keep you up at night. Back when this place was first built, he said, these lower levels were full of small family shops. Immigrant families mostly. They lived in some of the back rooms. Overcrowded. No regulations. There was a fire down there, long time ago, early 1900s. Not the big one everyone knows about, a smaller one that never made it into the tour scripts. Some people got trapped. Smoke, bad wiring, old wood. They say the walls remember. That should have been the end of it. A spooky story to go with the strange sounds, nothing more. But once he said trapped, I couldn't unhear it. The next time the voices came, I really listened. And underneath the conversation, the laughter, the scrape and clatter, I heard something else. Coughing. At first, it was faint. A soft, irritated cough, like someone with a stubborn tickle in their throat. Then another, deeper, choking. Then several, overlapping. The talking didn't stop when the coughing started. It just grew more frantic, faster, as if people were trying to finish what they were doing before something inevitable happened. The air in the hallway got thicker. I remember pausing in mid-swipe and suddenly having to take a deeper breath, like the oxygen had thinned. There was no visible smoke, but my lungs reacted as if there was. My chest tightened, my eyes started to sting. I took a step back, then another, until my shoulder blades hit the opposite wall. The coughing from inside the wall turned violent. Someone was gasping now, words coming out in broken bursts. For the first time, I recognized something in the noise. Not a word exactly, but the universal sound every language knows. Help. I left the hallway that night before my shift was done. Just walked away from my cart, from the half-mopped floor, from that swelling chorus of invisible lungs tearing themselves apart. I sat in the stairwell for 15 minutes, sucking in the cold, cleaner air, shaking so hard my radio crackled against my chest. I told myself I wouldn't go back there. that I'd trade floors with one of the other guys or request reassignment. But the next night, the schedule was the same. Same area, same route. And something in me needed to know if it had all been in my head. When I rounded the corner toward the cobbler's shop, I stopped dead. The hallway felt wrong, not just creepy, warped, like the air pressure had changed, pressing in on my eardrums. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual, one of them stuttering and flickering overhead. The voices were already going when I got there. No build-up this time. Full volume, like I'd walked into a room with the TV blaring. I couldn't understand the words, but the emotion hit me like a physical blow. Urgency, fear, the sharp edges of arguments and commands. There was crying now. Children, several of them. Their sobs overlapping in a harmonic that made my teeth ache. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I pressed both hands flat against the wall. The plaster was cool. Too cool for an interior wall. It almost burned with cold. And the instant my skin made contact, the sound cut out, just stopped. Silence. But in that silence, something worse slid into place. Images, not visual but emotional, slammed through me. Pure impressions, cramped rooms, quilts hung as makeshift walls, shoes lined up in neat rows along a baseboard, a workbench with metal tools laid out with almost religious care, a small stove, the flick of a match, the smell of coal and leather and sweat. And then, quickly, violently, heat, smoke, panic, I snatched my hands back like I'd touched a live wire. The impression vanished. The hallway was just a hallway again, blank, empty, humming with fluorescent boredom. But my palms ached with a deep, cold soreness, like I'd held snow for too long. They didn't talk to me, not in words. But from that night on, every time I walked that corridor, they grew louder. Sometimes it was work talk, voices low and matter-of-fact, the soft thud of shoes being set down, the scrape of a chair. Other times it was domestic, the clatter of dishes, a lullaby hummed under someone's breath, footsteps pacing. It wasn't always the fire. Whatever imprint was trapped in that wall, it wasn't just their last moments. It was their lives before those moments, looping endlessly in a space too small to contain them. One night, the building lost power. Storm outside, wind banging against the old windows, rain slanting sideways across the alleys. The emergency lights came on, dim red triangles at the ends of the halls. The market is old, and in that ghostly emergency glow, it looks even older. Stripped of its neon and signage, it becomes bones. I stood at the threshold of the hallway and listened. No fluorescent hum, no distant fans, just the soft drip of water and the echo of my own breathing. Then, under that, the voices, clearer than I'd ever heard them. I heard someone singing, a woman, voice low and steady, carrying a melody that felt older than the building, older than the city. It wasn't English, but the way she held the notes, the slight crack when she pushed her voice to comfort someone, those things didn't need language. Someone else murmured to a child. A man said something that made another person laugh, even as the child kept crying. I stepped forward, one pace at a time, feeling my way in the red half-light. When I reached the spot where I'd always heard them strongest, I felt crowded, like I'd stepped into an already occupied space. The hair on my arms stood up, the skin on the back of my neck prickled. It felt like walking into a room where an argument had just happened, the air still charged with the leftover emotion. Then, for the first and only time, the voices shifted into something I could understand. Just one phrase, one sentence forced into my language, like someone on the other side of the wall had finally realized I was there and wanted to be sure I heard. "Don't forget us," a voice said. Clear, close, right at my ear. I flinched back so fast I hit the opposite wall. My radio squealed, a sharp burst of feedback that made me wince. And just like that, the power came back on. The fluorescents flickered, buzzed to life, flooding the hallway with their sickly light. The voices vanished as completely as if someone had slammed a door. I finished my shift in a kind of numb autopilot, mopped, emptied bins, signed my sheet. But something fundamental had changed. The market no longer felt like an old building with creaks and quirks. It felt inhabited, layered, alive with people who no longer had bodies, but still had routines, jokes, children, fears. I started reading about Pike Place history after that. Not the sanitized tour version, the real stuff. The fires, the tenement-like housing packed into its lower levels in the early days. The immigrant families who lived and worked in the same cramped spaces, using improvised wiring, oil lamps, coal stoves. The small blazes that were put out quickly and the larger ones that weren't. Official records are thin, but between the lines, you can feel it. Lives burned up and written off as footnotes. I don't work there anymore. Day job now, different building, different neighborhood. But sometimes, when I walk through Pike Place as a civilian, part of the daytime crowd, I see tour groups stop near that hallway. The guide points out something else entirely. A comic shop, a curiosity store, some odd bit of trivia. They laugh, take pictures, move on. Nobody ever mentions the fire that isn't on the record, or the families who might still be living entire lives inside the walls, unaware that the city above them has changed 100 times. If you ever find yourself there late, when the crowds thin and the stalls start closing, listen closely as you walk past the lower levels. Don't just hear the buskers and the last orders and the clink of glasses from the nearby bars. Listen for the layers underneath, for the sewing of leather, for the clatter of wooden soles on old floors, for a lullaby that doesn't belong to your language, but still makes the back of your throat tighten. If you hear it, don't press your ear to the wall. Don't put your hands where mine were. Because once you know they're there, you can't unknow it. You'll walk through this city aware that some buildings breathe not just air, but memory. And some walls are not just holding up ceilings. They're holding in people who never got the chance to leave. They asked me not to forget them. So now, when I pass by and the tour guide's voice floats above the crowd, I glance at that hallway and nod. Just a little. A stupid, human gesture toward what most people would insist isn't there. But you work nights long enough in Seattle, you realize something. This city has layers, and not all of them are made of concrete and brick. Some are made of voices pressed so deep into the walls that they bleed through when the building thinks no one is listening. And if you walk those halls alone after midnight, trust this: something is listening back. Driving an empty light rail train through Seattle at night sounds peaceful until you realize how many places along that line feel like they're waiting for something. Or someone. If you were sitting in the front cab with me, watching the tunnels swallow the beams of our headlights, you'd notice it too. That sense that the city isn't really asleep. It's just turned its face away. I took an overnight operator shift because I liked that quiet. No crowds, no rush hour panic. Just a metal snake gliding through stations that felt like abandoned stages. For months, it was exactly that. Then one night at Capitol Hill Station, a passenger boarded my empty train after closing. from a platform that was supposed to be locked. It was one of those nights where the rain hit the tunnel entrances sideways, leaving streaks on the windshield even underground. The schedule was a maintenance loop. No live service, just me moving a 3-car train back and forth between Northgate and Angle Lake, so crews could test systems, run diagnostics, and do whatever it is they do at that hour. All the public entrances were closed. Station access for workers only. In the cab, every door indicator was green. Every camera showed what it was supposed to show. Empty platforms, lonely benches, occasional cleaner with a trash bag. By the time I coasted into Capitol Hill, I'd been alone for 3 runs in a row. I announced, out of habit, "Capitol Hill Station, no passengers, maintenance only," to a car full of no one. Old reflex. The train eased to a stop, doors stayed locked, and I waited for the signal to depart again. That's when the chime sounded. You know that little 2-tone ding that happens right before the doors open? It rang in my cab, clear as anything, and 3 of the door lights on my panel flicked from locked to open red. I jerked forward in my seat. I hadn't touched the controls. The system shouldn't have cycled. But the indicator showed car 2, side B, doors open. For a second, I thought it was a glitch. Old software, bad relay, something for maintenance to write up later. Then, from the camera feed for that car, I saw movement. A figure stepped through the doorway from the platform. One person, no backpack, no umbrella, no phone in hand. Just a dark coat, hood down, hair soaked like they'd been walking in the rain for hours. They moved with purpose, not like someone who'd slipped through a half-closed gate. More like someone who knew exactly where they were and where they were supposed to be. "Who the hell?" I muttered, flipping through camera views. Every platform camera in the station still showed the same thing. Closed gates, no staff in sight, no one on the platform. But inside my train, in car 2, that person walked calmly down the aisle and sat in the middle, facing straight ahead. Protocol said I should call control, report an unauthorized boarding. But something about the way they sat there froze me. Not slumped like someone high or drunk, not fidgeting like a fare dodger hoping not to get caught. Just waiting. I took a breath, hit the intercom. This is operator," I said, voice sounding thinner than I wanted. "We're not in service. You're not supposed to be on this train. Please exit the vehicle." The figure didn't move. For a moment I thought maybe they couldn't hear me. The speaker in that car sometimes crackled. I switched to the PA that broadcast down the whole train. "This train is out of service," I repeated, trying to sound more firm. "You need to exit at Capitol Hill Station. Doors will remain open until you leave." The person slowly turned their head toward the nearest camera. They didn't look up at it exactly, more like through it. Like they knew something was watching, but didn't care if it saw their face. Here's the part that still twists my stomach when I think about it. I knew that face, or I should have. Not personally, but from the little memorial taped to the operator's lounge bulletin board. The one for the driver who died 3 years before I hired on. The story everyone tells new hires once they're comfortable enough around you to share the tragedies. Signal malfunction, train overshooting at Angle Lake, collision with the buffer stop. Overnight turn, 1 fatality, the operator. This passenger looked exactly like the photo on that yellowing memorial paper. Same tired eyes, same half-solemn, half-embarrassed smile. Only now those eyes were darker. Flat, like old glass. I stopped breathing for a second. Then my radio crackled. "Train 91, why are your doors open?" Control asked. "You're supposed to be running closed loop." I stared at the panel. Having a minor door issue at Capitol Hill, I said. Working on it. Copy, they replied. No personnel scheduled at that station. Clear it and roll when you can. No personnel, no excuse for anyone to be on that platform, let alone on my train. I could have overridden the doors and forced them closed, but that would have meant moving the train with someone on board. And every cell in my body screamed that I did not want to be trapped in a tunnel with whatever that was. So I did the thing that makes no sense from the outside, but feels like the only option when you're neck deep in it. I left the cab. Stepping out onto the empty platform, the silence hit me. Not the usual quiet, thick, humming, alive. Even the air felt still, like the station was holding its breath. The open car door waited 10 yards down. Light spilled out onto the tiles. From where I stood, I couldn't see inside. I could only hear my own footsteps and the faint, steady hum of the train systems. As I reached the door, a cold draft slid past me, like someone squeezing by in a tight hallway. I flinched and looked up, but no one was there. The air inside the car, though, felt colder than the platform by several degrees. "Sir?" I called, keeping my voice as level as I could. "You can't ride this train. It's not in service. You need to—" I stepped inside and stopped. The car was empty. Seats, poles, advertisements for local colleges and phone plans. No passenger, no wet footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I turned slowly, scanning every row. Nothing. But when I glanced down at the floor by the seat where I'd seen him sit on the camera, I noticed one small thing. A dark streak, like a line of grease or soot, smudged where a boot heel would have rested. The doors behind me chimed. Not my doing. The system had decided they were closing. Instinct took over. I jumped back onto the platform just as they hissed shut. In the cab, the door indicators were all green again. Closed. Secure. The interior camera for car 2 showed nothing but empty seats and the faint reflection of my own pale face in the monitor glass. I could have told myself it was a glitch, a double image, residual footage from another time. I almost did. But then the train lurched, not forward, but somehow, sideways. My stomach did that elevator drop thing even though we hadn't moved an inch along the tracks. "Train 91, you're late for departure," Control said. "You good to go?" I swallowed. "Yeah," I said. "Rolling now." We pulled out of Capitol Hill. The tunnel swallowed us. The usual landmarks, those emergency alcoves, maintenance doors, the faint changes in the tunnel walls you learn like mile markers, seemed subtly wrong. Spaced differently. Too close, then too far. Time hiccuped. One moment I was watching the speedometer climb. The next we were coasting, and I couldn't remember having applied any throttle. That's when I saw him again. Not in the car this time. In the reflection. The windshield of a light rail cab is like a dark mirror when you're in a tunnel. If you look at it just right, you can see your own face floating over the tracks. The faint suggestion of the cab behind you. As I stared into that black glass, I saw another figure standing just behind my left shoulder. He wore the same uniform I did. Same high-visibility vest. Same company logo on the chest. But the vest was darkened across the front, as if soaked in something. His face was turned slightly toward the side, watching the tunnel. I knew, in that deep animal way, you know when someone is in a room with you, even if they don't make a sound, that if I turned around to look directly, there would be nothing there. So I didn't. I kept my eyes on the reflection. "You're not supposed to be here," I said under my breath. His mouth moved in the glass. I didn't hear a voice in the cab. I heard it in my head, like a memory. "Neither are you," it said. "Not on this run." For a second, the tunnel warped around us. The walls seemed to flex, like we were sliding through something too tight. The signal lights on the panel flickered. Angle Lake, the terminus where that operator had died, felt suddenly much farther away than a few stations. "What do you want?" I whispered. The reflection shifted its gaze to meet mine. His eyes were blank and furious all at once. "Off," was all he said. The speed dropped, not because I pulled back on the controller, but because the train simply slowed, coasting where it should have powered. The signal ahead glowed yellow, then red. My radio sparked to life, control barking about unexpected braking. I barely heard them. By the time we rolled into the next station, University Street, we were crawling. The moment the doors aligned, they unlocked with a soft click, even though no one had commanded it. I didn't argue. I didn't wait. I put the train in hold, grabbed my bag, and stepped out. The platform was empty again, but the air felt looser, like whatever had been coiled around the cars had finally slipped away. Behind me, through the cab window, the dark reflection still showed a figure at the controls. One hand on the controller, eyes forward, doing the job. "Train 91, why did you offload?" Control demanded in my ear. "You're not scheduled to stop there. Respond." I clicked the radio. "Door malfunction continuing," I said, voice shaking but steady enough. "Recommend taking this consist out of rotation. I'm not safe to operate right now." There was a pause on the line. Then, surprisingly, "Copy. Power down at the platform. Supervisor is on the way." I left that train with the lights still on and the systems humming, like a beast resting. As I walked up the escalator into the city, something in me knew that whatever got back into that cab after I left wasn't my problem anymore. They chalked it up to fatigue, long hours, maybe a low blood sugar episode. I let them. Easier than explaining that I'd seen a dead operator finish a route he'd never made it to while he was alive. I still drive sometimes, but only day shifts now. Crowded cars, noisy kids, impatient commuters. I'll take all of that over the hollow quiet of a maintenance loop. Because once you've watched your own cab from the outside, once you've seen someone else's reflection in your seat, you realize some runs in this city don't belong to the living anymore. And if you ever ride the light rail late, last train of the night, pay attention when you pass through a station that's supposed to be closed. If the doors chime but nobody gets on, if you catch an extra figure in the windshield glass where there shouldn't be one, don't sit near the front. Some shifts are still being finished by the ones who never got to clock out. I worked nights as a park ranger out at Discovery Park long enough to know there's a difference between being alone in the woods and being unwatched. Most people who hike that place in daylight think the creepiest part is the old military housing, the abandoned duplexes, the graffiti, the boarded-up windows. But all of that feels like a movie set when the sun's still up. It's at 2 a.m, with the wind coming off the sound and the fog crawling in from the bluff, that you start to feel the layers under the park, the fort, the drills, the people who never really left. If we were sitting together right now, I'd tell you flat out. The scariest thing I've ever seen wasn't a shadow in the trees. It was something my eyes couldn't see at all. My shift covered the whole park, but those old Fort Lawton areas were my responsibility. Patrols through the abandoned barracks, checks on the locked buildings, making sure no one was camping where they shouldn't. Most of it was routine. Kids sneaking in to drink, the occasional squatter, coyotes watching from the tree line like disinterested neighbors. The department gave us a thermal monocular a couple of years back, mostly to help spot people at night without shining bright beams into every bush. Handy tool. It reads heat signatures. Warm bodies show up as white or orange, cooler stuff goes darker. Animals, people, even engine blocks that were running recently. You get used to reading the world that way. It was a January night, clear and cold enough that my breath came out in long, pale streams. The sky above the park was darker than the city glow behind it. Stars faint but visible. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Even the hum of the city felt like it had taken a step back. I was walking the loop near the old barracks row, long, low buildings with boarded windows and peeling paint, standing in a line like tired soldiers. My flashlight traced over doorways, already secured earlier. Nothing out of place. Then my radio crackled. Unit on Lawton Loop. Any chance you can sweep the officers' row again? We had a noise complaint from the neighborhood. Someone thought they heard voices. I glanced over at the empty structures. No light leaking from anywhere, no movement. On it, I answered. And because it was cold and my fingers needed a distraction, I pulled out the thermal and took a lazy sweep across the fronts of the buildings. The barracks glowed in dull shapes, just retained heat from the day, a little warmer than the air. Trees and bushes were nearly black. The road was a faint ribbon. Nothing weird. I started walking, scanning, footsteps crunching on frosty pavement. When I got to the last building in the row, I swung the thermal across one more time and stopped so fast my boot slipped on the frost. There was a man standing in front of the last barracks. On the screen, he was bright. Hot white, edges glowing orange. A perfect, clear signature. Human height, human shape, facing the building with his back slightly toward me, like he was on guard. I lowered the monocular on instinct, heart hammering, and aimed my naked eyes at the spot. Nothing. Just empty space. Sidewalk, patch of grass, the shadow of a fir tree leaning over the old brick. No person, no figure. I raised the thermal again. He was still there. If you've never had your senses disagree that violently, you won't understand how wrong it feels. My eyes said, "You are alone." The device that had never lied to me before said, "No, you're not." "Hey," I called out, because protocol and fear were wrestling in my chest, and protocol won by a breath. "Park ranger. You're not supposed to be here after hours." The figure didn't move. I took a couple of steps closer, keeping the monocular up. On the screen, I saw his head tilt slightly, like he'd heard me but wasn't sure whether it mattered. His outline was crisp, cap or helmet, what looked like a coat that hung straight down, arms close to his sides, not hunched like a trespasser. Standing at ease, my mouth was dry. "You need to show me your hands," I said, falling into the script we use with uncooperative people. Slowly. Nothing. Not a twitch. Then he turned. Not fast. It was almost casual. His upper body rotated toward me, slow and fluid, as if he were pivoting on the balls of his feet. On the thermal, his face was just a brighter oval. No features, just heat. But the instant that blank oval aligned with my position, my whole body lit up with a sensation I can only describe as being looked at too hard. In regular night vision, there was still nothing in front of me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. A crow called once from some unseen branch, sharp and jarring. The air, already cold, seemed to thin another degree. "Radio check," I said quietly. pressing my shoulder mic partly to ground myself. Lawton Loop's clear for noise, but I'm going to do an extended foot patrol. Copy, dispatch replied. Everything okay up there? I hesitated, looking back through the thermal. The figure had taken a step toward me now, just one stride, but it closed more distance than it should have. Like the space between us wasn't behaving. Still bright, still human-shaped, still invisible to my naked eyes. Yeah, I lied. Just being thorough. When I let go of the mic, the radio hissed with a soft burst of static that almost sounded like words. I told myself it was in my head. I kept the monocular up and walked backward, not wanting to turn my back on whatever it was. The figure moved too, not in sync with my steps exactly, but in a pattern that kept the distance between us nearly the same. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't advancing like a threat. He was shadowing me. Like we were on the same patrol route and he'd just decided to mirror my pace. The old officers' houses loomed to my right, their dark windows blank. In another life, men had stood where I was standing, smoking, talking, leaning of an evening, unaware that decades later some other night worker would be sharing the sidewalk with one of them. The thought came uninvited and nasty. What if he thinks you're the ghost? I almost laughed out of sheer panic. A small choked sound escaped me instead. Look, I said, because I had to say something, even if I was talking to empty air. If you can hear me, you're not in trouble, okay? I just need you to, I don't know, let me finish my job without losing my mind. For the first time, the figure reacted. He stopped. Just stopped moving, dead still in the thermal view. The bright oval of his head dipped, as if he'd tilted it slightly, considering me. The air around me thickened. I could smell something faintly metallic, like old pennies and gun oil, the kind of scent shooting ranges have baked into their walls. I lowered the thermal, pulse pounding. There was still nothing there. I took a deep breath that tasted like rust and salt air and something stale. Were you stationed here? I asked the dark. At Fort Lawton? Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, more like a full room where everyone has suddenly gone quiet to listen. I lifted the monocular again. He was closer now. Too close. 10 feet away at most, body angled toward me, that blank, glowing oval fixed on my spot. For a second, a sharper heat flared at his chest area, like a burst of intense warmth, before dimming again. The monocular's gain flickered with it. Scrambling to adjust. There's a thing they teach you about old bases like this. A lot of stories never made it into the official records. Training accidents, fights, people who went AWOL and were quietly buried in paperwork rather than in the ground. Standing there with that heat signature in front of me, it hit me that maybe some of them never left their posts. I see you, I heard myself say. I can't see you, but I see you on this. I held up the device a little, half ridiculous, like I was showing a photo. You're still on duty, aren't you? The wind rustled through the dry grass. An old metal sign creaked faintly on a loose bolt. The figure stayed fixed in place, bright and solid in the thermal lens. Then, ever so slightly, he lifted one arm. Not fast, not aggressive. The motion was smooth, practiced. Hand up, elbow bent. A perfect, unmistakable military salute. From the outside, if someone had been watching me, it would have looked like I was staring at nothing on an empty road, suddenly choking on air. But through the lens, that glowing silhouette held the salute for a long heartbeat, then slowly lowered it. The metallic smell was stronger now. Under it, another note. A faint whiff of sweat, wool, canvas. The ghosts of old uniforms. I did the only thing that felt right. I raised my own hand, fingers to the brim of my cap, and returned the salute. I swear to you, the temperature around me dropped like someone had opened a freezer. The thermal image flared bright white one last time, then thinned, lines blurring, edges dissolving. Within 3 seconds, the space where he'd stood was as dark and cool as the trees behind him. Gone. Just gone. The metallic scent faded. Somewhere in the distance, a barred owl called, its hoot normal and almost stupidly alive. The night slid back into its usual shape. I stood there shaking for maybe a full minute, the monocular hanging useless in my hand. Eventually, I managed to key the radio. "Lawton Loop all clear," I said, voice rough. "No further noise, continuing patrol." "Copy," dispatch replied. "Nice and quiet night up there, huh?" I almost laughed. "Yeah," I said. "Nice and quiet." I finished my shift. I walked past that row of barracks twice more before dawn, thermal clipped back to my belt, eyes resolutely on the physical world. I didn't see him again. But the next time I pulled the device up, out of habit, the first thing I saw was my own heat signature reflected in a dark window. Bright, alive, temporary. You can choose not to believe any of this. You can say I was tired, half frozen, spooked by too many old stories. Maybe that's what I'd tell myself if it had only happened once. But that wasn't the last time the thermal picked up something my eyes couldn't. What stuck with me from that night isn't the fear. It's the posture. The way he stood. The way he saluted. Like the land itself had assigned him a post. Watch this empty road, these abandoned barracks, this park built on old orders that never got fully canceled. So if you ever find yourself in Discovery Park after dark, ignoring the closed signs because you think the rules don't apply to you, and you get the sudden, ice-cold feeling that you're being appraised by someone you can't see, do yourself a favor. Straighten up a little. Keep your voice down. Maybe even nod once at the shadows in front of those crumbling barracks. Some posts in this city are still manned. Not by cameras, not by living rangers, but by whatever refuses to stand down, even decades after the war moved on. I used to think burnout was just a feeling, being tired, bored, sick of the grind. Then I worked the night shift at a fulfillment center in the Kent Warehouse District and learned there's another kind of burnout, the kind where your body stops, but your work doesn't. If you were sitting next to me right now, maybe scrolling your phone while this plays in the background, I'd tell you to really listen for a minute. Because what I'm about to describe felt so ordinary at first, so much like any other night on the line, that I didn't understand how wrong it was until it was way too late. The building was huge. A concrete and steel box with artificial daylight blazing at all hours. On Graveyard, that light is its own kind of cruelty. Bright enough to trick your brain, but never warm. I worked as a picker. If you don't know what that means, it's simple. A handheld scanner tells you which aisle, which bin, how many units. You walk, you scan, you pull, you drop items in a yellow tote. The belt takes it away. Repeat until your legs and thoughts blur into one endless forward motion. They measure everything. Pick rate, error rate, idle time. There's a clock on your wrist, another in your scanner, another in your head. The night it started, my scanner buzzed awake a minute before official shift. That wasn't unusual. We all clocked in a little early to beat the rush at the turnstiles. The welcome screen flashed the same bland motivational slogan, then loaded my first batch of orders. Aisle D43, bin 17B. I remember that exact code because I saw it too many times. I headed out into the steel canyons. The warehouse was already humming, belts whirring, vents roaring, forklifts beeping in distant lanes. Overhead, signs glowed with row numbers. The smell was cardboard, plastic, dust, and that faint sharpness of metal and machine oil. I scanned the first bin. The scanner chirped. Good pick. The tote on my cart was empty, waiting to be fed. Everything was normal. The first thing that felt off was the silence. Not full silence. Machines were still going, but a weird hush from the other workers. You get used to seeing people in your peripheral vision, flashes of orange vests and movement down the aisles. That night, as I made my way to D43, it felt like I was always just missing everyone. I'd hear the squeak of a cart up ahead, turn the corner, and find the lane empty. I'd see a shadow moving at the end of a row, look up, and it would slide out of sight before my brain could register it as a person. Whatever, I told myself. Zone shift. Everyone's on the other side tonight. Then my scanner buzzed again. New order, aisle D43, bin 17B, quantity 1. I frowned. That was the exact same order I'd just fulfilled. I checked the item in my tote, a small box, generic home gadget. The scanner showed it registered. The system should have moved on. Instead, the screen blinked like it was impatient. Aisle D43, bin 17B. Quantity 1. Glitch, I thought. It happens. I rescanned the bin. The device made an ugly beep this time, the error tone. Item already picked, it flashed. Then, without transitioning, it kicked back to the same order again. Good start, I muttered. I flagged it as a tech issue and requested a new batch. The request spun for a second, then the screen updated. Aisle D43, bin 17B. Quantity 1. I laughed once, the sound too loud in my own ears. Okay, very funny. I powered the scanner off, waited, turned it back on. It booted slowly, company logo, login prompt, all the usual steps. When my profile loaded, the queue appeared. Aisle D43, bin 17B, quantity 1. This time, the order count in the corner caught my eye. It's usually a normal number, 60, 120, something like that. Tonight, it read 999 plus. I told myself they'd loaded a big wave, and the UI was just rounding up. Shift start jitters, nothing more. I pushed my cart down the aisle and started picking. I don't know how long I stayed in that loop. The first hour is easy to lose. Your body takes over. You walk, reach, scan, drop, push. Every time I scanned 17B, the scanner would chirp, the tote would roll along when it was full, and another tote would slide into place like magic. Each time, the screen ticked the order down by 1, then refreshed, with the exact same line again. At some point, I looked up expecting the usual announcement chime for first break. Nothing came. The overhead clock by the nearest support beam still said 12:17, the same time it had said when I'd started. My internal sense, though, said it had been longer. My legs ached in that deep, lactic way that doesn't kick in after just a few runs. My throat was dry. My shoulders burned. I checked my wristband. The digital display, usually a parade of micrometrics, was frozen. Time, 12:17. Heart rate, 3 blinking dashes. Connection, searching. The belts were still moving, the lights still blazing. But it was as if my part of the building had been cut out of real time and pasted into a still frame. I tried to shake it off. Went looking for a supervisor. Left my assigned zone, taboo, but I didn't care. And turned down the main walkway that cuts through the warehouse. That's when the scale of it hit me. Every lane save mine was empty. Carts parked neatly. Totes stacked at induction points, ladders folded and leaned against racks. But no people, no forklift drivers, no water bottles left half-drunk on end caps. Just industrial stillness, like someone had called a break and forgotten to tell me. I clicked my radio. This is pick station D43. Anyone copy? Static. Then, faintly under it, something like whispering, fast, layered, like 100 voices all talking over each other at the edge of hearing. I killed the call so fast my thumb hurt. My scanner buzzed in my other hand. When I glanced down, the screen had changed. Not a location this time. Just a message. Outstanding units, 73. Below it, in smaller text, target completion, past due. The number 73 sat there, pulsing gently. With each pulse, the warehouse seemed to breathe in and out around me. They tell a story in places like that. In late shift break rooms when everyone's too tired to filter themselves, about a forklift accident a few years back. Night shift, compressed schedule. A picker cut through a blind intersection too fast. A forklift came the other way, just a fraction too quick. And by the time anyone understood what had happened, it was already over. The order queue for that workers' station had 73 units left when they died. It's one of those details that sticks in your head even if you don't want it to. Staring at my scanner, that number didn't feel like a coincidence. "I'm not them," I whispered, like the system could hear me. That wasn't me. The number didn't change. The message at the bottom did. Shift status. Incomplete. I don't remember deciding to go back to the aisle. My feet took me there, the way you go back to a bad habit even after it's hurt you. D43 loomed ahead, tall racks forming a canyon of boxed goods. Bin 17B waited at waist height, innocent and ordinary. The little label with its barcode might as well have been a keyhole. I scanned it. The scanner chirped. Another unit registered. Outstanding units, 72. The air around me seemed to tighten, like the building was leaning in. So that's what it wanted. You'd think people don't negotiate with software. But that's all the job is, really. You agree to turn parts of yourself into numbers, and in return, the system tells you that you're doing okay. I told myself if I just did this, if I just cleared that cursed count, whatever was happening would reset. The clock would jump. The PA would announce break. People would flood back into the aisles, complaining about the cold. So I started working like my life depended on it. Pick, scan, drop. The tote would roll away, one after another, as fast as I could fill them. Every time I glanced at the scanner, the number clicked down. 69, 63, 58. My shoulders screamed. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. I stopped thinking in words, reduced to a litany of locations and quantities. The weird thing was the stock. In a normal night, you clear out a bin pretty quick. You have to restock or get reassigned when you run dry. That night, 17B never emptied. My hand sank into the same cardboard case, closing on the same shape over and over. It was like the physical world had decided to cooperate with the glitch. At outstanding units 20, the white noise in the air changed. It took me a minute to realize I was hearing footsteps that weren't mine, not properly, but an echo of them. Other pickers, maybe. A whole ghost shift of people stuck in the same mindless loop. I didn't see anyone, but I felt them. The vibration of carts rolling, the sigh of exertion, a cough, a muttered curse in a language I don't speak. At 10, my vision tunneled. The world shrank to the next tote, the next beep, the relentless countdown. I don't know if I was crying, but my face was wet. My scanner felt sticky in my hand, like something thicker than sweat had seeped into the plastic. At 1, everything stopped. The scanner flashed. Outstanding units. 0 target completion. Met for a second. Nothing changed. No fanfare. No blare of some invisible trumpet. Just that flat corporate language blinking back at me. Then, in the top corner of the screen, where my name and employee ID usually sat, the text blurred and reformed. Shift complete. Below that, a final note in a slightly different font, like a system message from a deeper layer. You may go. The lights above me flickered. Once. Twice. The ache in my legs hit all at once, like someone had dropped a weight onto my muscles. My wristband display came back to life, screaming numbers, heart rate through the roof, timestamp blinking 4:53 a.m., like it had always known what time it was. Somewhere in the distance, a forklift horn blared, human and normal. Voices drifted down the main aisle, tired and complaining. The world rushed back in. I don't remember the walk to the punch clock. Just the feeling of the cold night air hitting my face as I stepped out of the building, and the way the parking lot lights looked softer than the ones inside, like real stars instead of manufactured suns. They said later there'd been a brief network glitch at the start of shift. You might have seen some weirdness on your scanner, one tech told me, but it would have corrected pretty quick. I nodded and said nothing. I put in my notice that week. You can believe all that or not. You can say I was exhausted, that I hallucinated half of it, that stress and repetition do strange things to the brain. But here's what I know. A warehouse is designed to turn people into extensions of an algorithm. When you're inside that long enough, when your worth is measured in units per hour and the system never truly stops, it's not hard to imagine that some part of you keeps walking those aisles even after your body can't. And if you ever find yourself on Graveyard in a place like that, Kent, Sumner, any of those big anonymous boxes glowing against the dark, pay attention if your scanner ever shows you a number that doesn't make sense. Especially if it says 73. Especially if the building feels a little too empty, like you're the only one left running a shift that should have ended years ago. If the screen ever tells you, you may go, don't wait around to see what happens if you don't.